Hey guys, so I also want to give you, in addition to the and-elim and intro videos, I want to talk about or-elim and or-intro again. So go through another 3 proofs just to give you the idea and just give you maybe a better feel of how someone attacks it after they feel comfortable with how these things work. So the thing about or elimination, this is your first taste of subproofs, right? And it's important to first understand the logic behind in terms of informally, the reasoning behind how an or elimination works. Another word for or elimination is just proof by cases, right? And I know that you've seen this in other places too. But the idea is this or sentence is telling us, well, either one of 2 things is true, right? Either A is true along with B, so either A and B are true, or case 2 is true where A and C are true. So either we have case 1 where A and B is true, or we have case 2. The point of an or elimination is to say, well, okay, you know that either one of those 2 things is going to happen, but frankly, you don't care because both of them will get you to your conclusion. That's the point of an or elimination. It's not saying that like, oh, one of these sides is no good or something, or I just get to tear off one side, right? If this was an and, I could just tear off, right? If this was an and, I could just say, oh, A and B, beautiful. I just tore off one side. And then, but if I try to say and elimination from that, well, that's no good because the main operator is not an and. So you better go check that you understand how and elimination work, because you can never do it if the main operator is not an and. This does not say this is true and that's true. It's just saying this is true or that's true. So what about trying to do an or elim there? Can I do that? I'm just tearing off something and it had an or as a main connective. Why can't I do that? Well, because think about what this is saying. The rule was simple, was an and, because and guaranteed that both sides are true. But the or is telling you, I don't know which one is true. One of them is, but I'm not sure which. So we can't just tear off one side and say, oh, you know, I get you because I have the right connector and I eliminated it. Why doesn't it work? Well, because you're not actually justified to make that inference. I mean, think about it. If I say I am either over 30 and a male, or I'm under 30 and a male, can you just tell me, oh, that means you're over 30 and you're a male? No, you have no reason to believe one side versus the other. All that the premise told you is that either or, and you have no reason to believe one side is true versus the other at this point. So instead, what we're going to do is we're going to tell a little story. All right, that's all a subproof is. It's a little hypothetical story where it says, if the left side was true, then conclusion. And I'll put just what that is in a moment. Oops. Click the wrong button. And then further, so I'm going to end that subproof. And then I'm going to say, and then alternatively, if the other side was true, again, I'm not guaranteed to believe the other side is true. I'm just saying, remember, this is a hypothetical. I'm telling a story. I'm saying, if A and C is true, then I'm also going to show you that the conclusion holds. Okay, so what am I doing here? I'm showing you that, well, if case 1 is true, then you're going to be happy. I'll show you that the conclusion follows. And if case 2 is happy, then I'll show you that the conclusion follows. And because the premise told you that either you're going to have case 1 or you're going to have case 2, then what do you know at the end of those 2 subproofs? You can just say, oh, boom, conclusion. And now we're outside of the subproofs. Now we're outside of the hypothetical story. So the idea is I am guaranteed to believe that the conclusion is true because if the left side was true, the conclusion's true. And if the right side was true, the conclusion would be true. And I know at least one of those 2 sides has to be true. That's what premise 1 is telling me. It's telling me either left has to be true or right has to be true. This subproof tells you if left is true, then you're happy. This one tells you if right is true, then you're happy. It's like saying, okay, I hit a fork in the road, but then both ends of the road are going to land me at the exact same town. then so you know I'm either going to drive left or I'm going to drive right. But regardless of which way you drive, you're going to end at the same place. That's all that or elimination is telling you. So it's only at the very end here are we going to cite or elimination. And we're going to cite it from these two things. We're saying, well, I know my conclusion is true because I know either the left side has to be true or the right side is true. And regardless of which one it is, the conclusion will follow. That's what we're going to do here. So the conclusion for us is just A. And then now we have, let me delete that extra line right there. Now what we have is a perfectly set up subproof for or elimination. Let me go ahead and show lines again. Right, so now what I'm doing is I'm citing three different parts for this or elimination. I'm saying, well, because I know it's either left or right, and because the left one makes me happy and the right one makes me happy, and it's got to be one of those two, then I'm happy. That's the logic behind or elimination. And so you don't actually say or elimination until the very end. I see so many people trying to put it up top or something. Or elimination is rarely cited until very deep down in the proof. Okay, you need to have subproofs before it. So let me point out a couple other things about this. I already know how my two subproofs are going to end. They both have to end with the conclusion. Because the point is, I'm showing how both sides will lead to the conclusion. And on that note, I know how both subproofs need to start. One needs to start with the left side, and then the other needs to start with the right side. So this isn't just a whole bunch of trivial. This is exactly the structure I set up every time I do a proof by cases or an or elimination. I don't just start a subproof and then try to start working it out. I literally will set up both subproofs, tell myself what they need to start with, what they need to end with, and then even the conclusion at the very end. If you don't do that, you're just asking yourself to remember it later on, and there's no reason to do that. You're giving yourself extra work, and it's just a bad idea. At this point, I have an easy as heck proof, because all I need to do is I need to make it so that A and B leads to A, and then completely separate from that, I need to make sure that A and C leads to A. So if you paid attention to the and rules, that should be painfully easy, right? If A and B are true, then all I need to do is tear off one side to get the A. And the same thing for 4. From 4, I can just tear off the A to get 11 down there. So that's coming from that one. And we are also citing and elimination. Okay, so again, I'm showing how, all right, the premise was that either A is true with B or A is true with C. And so all I did was say, okay, well, if A is true with B, then A is true. And then on the other hand, if A is true with C, then A is true. And then I conclude finally, based on those three things, based on the fact that one or the other is true, and in both cases, they'll give me what I want. That's how I know A is true at the end of the day. Notice, I'll just say one more thing about this. I didn't get this A from this subproof. And the reason is because that's a different story, right? In that subproof, we've assumed that A and B is true. And we're saying, okay, what happens if A and B is true in the first subproof? And after you're done with that subproof, after you've exited out, then you want to stop thinking, right? So notice how 3 and 4, after 3, I ended the subproof. That's me saying, okay, I'm done with this story. I've gotten it to tell me exactly what I want. I've gotten it to the conclusion, and now it's done. And then I start a totally new subproof where it say, all right, now let's pretend the right side was true. And now I'll make you happy with that one too. And then after that's done, after I get to that conclusion, I end it again, which is when, and then finally outside of both subproofs is where I finally give the I finally give the conclusion and then justify it with or elim and then the 3 pieces. Okay, so that's how the most vanilla version of or elimination works. So let me go ahead and show you, let me show you one with or introduction. Try to keep that in mind. You might need to just go back. So I'm going to show you one with or introduction right now. And then at the end, I'll show you one with both. So if you need to, then go ahead and rewind, and of course just rewatch the or elimination thing if things aren't fresh after we do this one. Okay. So let's shift gears just for a second though, and let's talk about or introduction. So if we're doing introduction, that means we're going with lines that don't necessarily have an or, and we're creating a new line that does have an or. So you're going to want to do that sort of thing when you see, oh, my conclusion is an or, so I'm going to build an or sentence. So then you want to be thinking, all right, most likely then, or a comment. So often, especially in these early problems that we're giving you, well, then I'm building an or sentence. It's probably going to be an or introduction at the end of the day. P or Q. So, right, this part I don't always throw in which rule I think I'm going to end on, but I always put the specific conclusion. I don't always know what rule I'm going to end on. So here I'm just kind of, I am guessing a little bit, educatedly guessing, because I know that this is an or sentence. There's a good chance I need to use this rule. But all I know for sure is that I need to end on this line. I don't know for sure that this is the only rule that'll do it for me. At this level of logic, it's a pretty safe bet that this is the only rule that will do it for you. You just don't have enough things going on right now. Okay, but back to the basics. Remember, this is the stuff you should be completely already a 100% pro on. Is what should you do with premise one? Well, it's an and sentence, so that is an easy answer. You just break it down into its two parts. And what are these two parts going to say? Well, they both just came from one. You just tore one apart. And they both are just going to be eliminating one, or eliminating the and on one. So that should be super easy already, just assuming that you watched the first videos well enough. Okay, whenever we have an and as a premise, we just tear it to its parts. Okay, now, oops, my conclusion is wrong, as some of you caught. I want P or R at the end of the day. I don't want P or Q. P or Q, I mean, I start with P and Q, so P or Q would be super, I mean, this will be easy too. But I don't want P or Q. I want P or R is the conclusion we want down here. And that's just given by what the problem is. So that was just a typo on me. Okay, so I'm trying to get to P or R. All right. So for now is the part where we actually get to or intro. And for this, we need to make sure we understand the reasoning behind why this is a safe inference. What I claim is that I know P or R is true based on nothing other than the fact that I know that P is true. Okay, so think about that for a second. And specifically, it's helpful to think back in terms of the truth table for an or. And this is why we were so insistent that you learn the truth tables, because that's what's going on underneath all of this. This or sentence is true just in case one of the sides is true, right? So if I already know that P is true, right? And that's what it means when I put it as a premise, or when I get it from a premise, that's me saying, hey, this guy is true. Then I already know that this or sentence has to be true, right? What's the only way an or sentence could be false? If P is false and R is false, right? The or sentence is just saying, hey man, one of these is true. So if you already know that one of them, that something is true, so if I already know that P is true, I can just say, or R is true, even though R didn't occur anywhere else in the proof. Sure, it's down there in the conclusion, but I don't get it from any premise. So this is actually one good thing to try to keep in mind. Anytime that you see that the conclusion has a letter that your premises don't, you're most likely going to have to add that on with something like or introduction. Okay, so in this case, we're saying I know P is true, and because P is true, I know that either P is true or R is true. It's like me telling you, well, my name is Sean, so either my name is Sean or it's Brandon. Am I wrong? Of course I'm not wrong. Me saying my name is either Sean or Brandon, yeah, I'm being difficult, but I mean, I'm right. It's either Sean or it's Brandon. And that's all you're saying right here. You're just saying, well, you start off with saying, oh, well, my name is Sean. And then now you're saying my name is Sean or Brandon. Well, it just so happens that's what the conclusion wanted you to entail. So you're showing, based on believing this, you are justified to believe this. You're justified just to say, okay, well, because I know one is true, then it doesn't even matter if the other is true. The disjunction as a whole will be true. So we'll throw these away. And again, all that, so, and introduction, I should have made this more clear in the last one, or should have said this more explicitly. And introduction is always going to take two things and put them together. So that means you're always citing two different lines, always. Or introduction, on the other hand, is only going to take one thing and then just stick one thing onto it. So or introduction is just going to take whatever you knew was true in the first place. So you knew that my name is Sean, and now you're just saying, okay, or his name is Brandon, right? So you're just saying, or the thing that you don't actually know is true. But the point is you always cite the thing that you do know is true, and then you throw on the thing that the conclusion was asking you for. Okay, so now this is how or introduction works. It feels, so for a lot of people, this is their least favorite rule because it feels like magic. I'm pulling this or out of nowhere. But the thing to remember is it's just, what is a valid argument, right? You'll never be able to believe P and then reject P or Q. And that's all that we're concerned with. We're just saying, if we do start with the premises, is there any way you're going to deny where I go? Nope. And if you think so, you didn't do your truth tables well enough. Okay. If you are still having confusion on this, that is totally common. Email me. It's a very new, subtle, weird rule. I don't mean to suggest that you should be getting this as straightforwardly as you do the and rules. Definitely feels weird to know when you even need to do it. So this is one to get used to. And this is also the reason why I say, get used to the and rules first, because don't mix up the confusion you have with this stuff with the and rules. And rules, cut and dry. This stuff, weirder, more subtle, takes a little bit more careful attention to what's going on. Okay, last proof I want to show you guys. This one. Okay, so now I see I have one premise. I've got my one conclusion. Okay, so I'll do what I always do, which is throw in my conclusion at the very end. Except now I'm not as confident as I was before. Before I was giving an educated guess as to what the rule would be, and but here, I mean, you can give your educated guess, but just, I mean, that might get you into trouble because you might try to make that work when it really isn't. Here, what I'm going to notice is I don't have, before I had all these ands that I could, or I had an and that I could just tear apart. And from that I could work with, and then I was left with the stuff, with the building blocks that immediately were ready to give me the or intro. For this one though, I don't have an and as a premise. All that I have as my premise is a disjunction. So what's often the case is that if your only premise is a disjunction, it's very common that you have to do a disjunction eliminate, you have to do an or elimination, right? If the only thing you have to work from is an or sentence, well, you can't do an or elimination. It's not clear what you can really do. If it's not clear yet, so this is one of those things that is almost so natural that it's almost goes by the wayside sometimes. You're generally going to be thinking of applying elimination rules to the premises and then trying to apply introduction rules to build the conclusion. Now, this, it's not always so cut and dry, but generally speaking, that's one way to think about it. I'm breaking apart my premises and then I'm building up my introduction. That works much better when you're just working with the and rules alone, but that's often one thing to try to keep in mind. Right, there's never going to be a foolproof 100% rule on how to do these proofs. That's one of the reasons why we're having you do them. It's so that you can practice your own problem-solving abilities that isn't just simply regurgitating things. Okay, let's get to it. So I talked before about how as soon as I know that I'm doing an or elimination, I know exactly how the entire proof is going to be structured. And it's not just me, you should too. I'm dead serious. Before you do any or elimination proof, you should know exactly how it's going to look. How is it going to look? Well, it's going to have two subproofs, right? Assuming if this was, so it has two subproofs because it has a left and a right side. If this was like P or Q or R, right? If it had a middle also, we'd have three subproofs, but drop that complexity for now. So I have two subproofs right now. Might be slightly hard to see it, but let me go ahead and make it slightly easier to see. So I'm going to justify my conclusion, right? So this is what we decided early on, because the only premise I have is an or. Well, probably the only way I'm going to be able to get to my conclusion is with or elimination. So the idea is I'm going to show how, regardless of if the left side is true or if the right side is true, I'm going to get to my conclusion. So the conclusion I'm just going to justify with or elim. And so if I want to justify my conclusion with or elim, then I better be citing the disjunction and then the two subproofs. But before we do that, let me try to approach it slightly differently, just so that, because I could feel like I already would get people lost at that point. So how should both of these subproofs start? Well, before I even say that, how should both of these subproofs end, right? This really does not take any critical thinking. All that it takes is you recognizing this is my conclusion. So I'm literally just going to copy and paste that conclusion at the end of course, it doesn't paste in here, at the end of both of my subproofs. Because that's exactly how or elim works. It says, okay, if you want to show how both sides of this lead to the conclusion, then you need to end both of your subproofs with the conclusion. Further, how should both of the subproofs start? Well, they should start with either end of the or. So it should start with P and B. And then how should this one start? So this is the hypothetical story that shows that P and B will lead to, of course. So here we have the story where P and B will lead to P or Q. Here we're going to have the story where Q and B are going to lead to P or Q, right? And so at the end of the day, I'm just saying, well, I know that P and B leads to P or Q. I know that Q and B leads to P or Q. And I know that at least one of those things has to be true. So that's why I'm going to cite the disjunction that tells me, well, either left or right, either case one or case two. And then I'm going to cite the subproof first where I show case one makes me happy, and then the subproof where case two makes me happy. But this whole thing, you should be able to throw down in I'm not doing this just for pedagogical reasons. This is honestly what I do every time I have an or elim proof. Every time you realize, hey, I want to do an or elim, you should throw down two subproofs, specify exactly what the conclusions of those subproofs are, and specify exactly how they should start. Because now all that I have to do, I don't have to bother with this bottom line at all. I am literally done with touching that line. All that I need to do is do two mini problems. I need to just do this proof where I get from the premise and this assumption all the way down to this conclusion. And then I need to do this mini proof where I get from this assumption, and I can still use the premise. You can always use your premises. And then I'm getting from those down to this, right? So now that I've set up my or elimination, all that I have to do is work inside my subproofs. I've made this a much easier problem, right? Because now, as soon as I have this as my assumption, well, what's the main operator? It's an and, so I can just tear it apart into its two sides. This should be very natural at this point. So all I'm doing is I'm saying eliminate the and. I'm just going to tear it into its two sides. And then, okay, now we need to think, all right, I've got all these raw materials. I've got P, I've got B. I need to get P or Q. Well, remember, what or intro lets us do is say, as long as you can just get me one, I'm happy. And needs both. And needs make sure you get P and you get Q and you put them together if you want P and Q at the end. But or is just saying, hey, you're just trying to tell me P or Q is true. So if you can just point out that one is true, I'm happy. So that's all we're going to do for this conclusion is we're just going to point, oh, you want to know that either P or Q is true? Well, I can find one for you, P, right there. And then all I'm doing is introducing this or. Boom. And I'll delete these extra lines that don't mean anything. And now we can go ahead and press check, and we get it. We'll go ahead and check all that, and we're good. Right? So all I did was tear it apart. Then I realized one of those things that I tore apart is actually primely ready to build this last thing. Right? Because all I needed to do was add on this thing, which is exactly what or intro does. Now let's do the same sort of thing down here. So realize your assumption is an and. So we can just tear it apart. Right? And then both of these, what are they going to cite? Are they going to cite premise one? No. Premise one is a disjunction. You can't do an and elimination from a disjunction. This tells you that either Q or B, right? I'm not going to go through and rehearse all that. Again, if you want that, rewind. The point is, you know B is true simply from the assumption of the story. This story said, assume that Q and B is true. And we're just saying, okay, well, because of that, I know Q is true and I know B is true. So both of these, we're just going to cite from right there. So we're just doing an and elim on both of these. And again, if you think ahead, you can see like, oh, okay, either way. So if you think ahead, you can notice I don't actually need B later. So let me go ahead and show step numbers. So line 8 as well as line 4, I could have just tossed those out and the proof will be just fine. So if you want to, if you're able to start thinking ahead like that, what am I actually going to use? But if you're not that comfortable, that's fine. Just lay out all your research, just lay out what you can use. And now you have Q and you have B. And you have this or at the bottom. Now remember, if this was an and, you would have needed to find P and you would have needed to find Q and you needed to stick them together. And that would have been a problem because all you have is Q in this story. You can't go looking into the other story. That's a no-go. You've already ended that story. But in this subproof, in this story, you have Q. And again, because you need just an or, it's happy with just you having Q. You can say, oh, you need to know that either P or Q is true. You need to know my name is either Sean or Brandon. Well, up here, I'm going to point out it's Brandon, or, just to fit the thing, it's Sean. So up here, I'm going to point out it's Sean. So then you do know, okay, then it is either Sean or it's Brandon. And here, again, this is the weird, funky rule where we're taking a line that didn't have an or and we're making a line that did have an or simply because we knew that this line was true, Q, we're adding on this other part, the P or, right? Because you know Q is true, you know P or Q has to be true. And you're going to go ahead and do the truth table to verify that. Okay, and I'll go ahead and delete those lines, which are extra. And now, notice I can check that. I can also check that. But what did I give you a promise of at the beginning? That I wouldn't even need to touch 10, and I guarantee that you'll still be okay. And why is that? Why did I not need to do anything at the end of my proof? I just need to, it's because I set it up at the beginning. It's because that was the point of the or elimination. The or elimination was just saying, you know what? Both of those sides will get you the conclusion. So all I'm going to do is show you I'm just going to do two different proofs where I show you first that the left side will get you the conclusion. And then I'm going to do one where the right side gets you to the conclusion. And then because both sides got you to the conclusion and one side has to be true, you better believe that the conclusion itself has to be true. Okay. So hopefully this makes it more clear in terms of how to be setting up and thinking about these or elims. It's not as straightforward as the and elim. Whenever you think about doing a proof by cases, doing this or elim, I'm serious. Whenever you email me, this is what the response will be. It will be, how do your subproofs start? How do your subproofs end? And then at the very end, after both of the subproofs, finally you just say conclusion. And then finally, it's only then that you say or elimination. Notice nowhere else in this proof did I say or elimination until the very end, right? So my conclusion, just to walk through real quick, my conclusion came from the disjunction and the two subproofs. And then you can look inside the subproofs to look at how they worked. How did I get 5? It just came from P. How did I get P? It just came from 2. And 2 was just the assumption of my story. How did I get 9? It just came from Q. How did I get Q? It just came from 6, was just the assumption of that story. Okay, I know I burned through these very quickly, but that's because I also know that you can slow down these videos, rewind, and do all of that fun stuff. All right, be sure to email me if and when you run into trouble. This sort of thing feels hard when you start off, but if you can get more practice in it, this is an intuition that everyone has and uses intuitively. Just make sure that you're not guessing and checking. Make sure you're holding yourself accountable for what you understand. Okay, email me when you have questions.